Good morning, and thank you for joining me on the path to liberty. I'm Michael Bolden with the 10th Amendment Center, and this is the show for Monday, April 25th, 2022. And today I'm talking about one of those agencies that we love to hate, and if you're like me, you definitely do. That's the TSA. There's always loads of issues with that agency. And on this episode, I want to highlight a couple of recent ones that have gotten out there and gotten some opposition from groups on the left and the right. First of all, they're expanding their facial recognition program just for convenience, of course, and it's never going to be used to expand mass warrantless surveillance. They never do that kind of stuff, right? And then they're spending millions and millions of dollars to be more inclusive in their unconstitutional searches. And we could spend all day talking about problems with the TSA, why we don't like it. But almost no one who does this talks about what I think is the biggest issue, that is, under the Constitution, the TSA shouldn't even exist. But first of all, before getting to that, I want to say a quick hello to everyone out in the live chat while we allow people another minute or so to join us for the live stream today. There's Cheriton Farmer in Missouri, Leslie in Missouri as well, Dixie Strong in Alabama, Haji in Michigan, Liberty Revolutionary, also in Missouri, Clay Kent. Missouri is represented. I love you guys. Matt, I love everybody. Thank you for being here. Mad Mom Anon, 5x5, Cowboy Ray Rogers, Dave Simmons, Ed Hen, Darlene Campbell in Oklahoma. Hunter's over at Twitch. Thanks for being here. Appreciate the intro. Comment on the intro. Tyler B., good to see you as well. And he says you can say the same for pretty much every federal agency. Absolutely. And I just did. If you're not following us on Instagram and TikTok of all places, I'm doing, between Mike Meharry and myself, we're doing a bunch of short 1-minute takes on various things. And that's one of the ones that we posted over the weekend. Jason also says we need to get rid of the Patriot Act. Absolutely. A lot of their garbage. Anyways, I want to get right to this. I'm going to look at the comments and questions, see if there's anything I can answer later in the show. But I want to start out with pointing out that this new facial recognition program is being expanded, and I guess maybe I'm talking about it because it's here at home at LAX. TSA rolls out facial recognition at LAX is the article by Mike Meharry from just last week, and he starts out with, the TSA recently rolled out facial recognition technology at some Los Angeles International Airport security checkpoints. We knew this kind of thing was coming. Called the next generation of credential authentication technology. Sorry, I guess I'm just reading this stuff, usually CAT. The system uses a camera to capture a photo of the passenger's face. The photo is then compared to the passenger's government-issued ID. Now, there's a number of problems with this. Let's say they're just doing it to verify. We shouldn't trust government to only keep it in that one database and not share it with other agencies, NSA, FBI, DHS, local police, ICE, DEA, all these other, ATF, all these other agencies are going to get access to it. Plus, all the times that they're doing this, it's expanding the capabilities of the facial recognition, getting it to be smarter and smarter and smarter. So it's a test run on all of this. According to the TSA, of course, they say in here in their press release, photos captured by CAT units will not be stored. They'll never, ever be traded off. Will not be stored or used for any other purpose, ever, other than identity verification in the security checkpoint. Guess, and if you believe that government is telling you the truth on this type of thing, well, I don't know what the hell you're watching the show for. Anyways, guests who do not wish to participate in facial recognition verification can opt out in favor of an alternative identity verification process. And I'm certain, just like with the pat-downs, when you opt out of going through the scanners, they're going to make it so inconvenient, so difficult, so uncomfortable, probably so public, that a lot of people are just not going to do it. They want to pressure everyone into this facial recognition program. And Mike Meharry makes an important point. He says the TSA plans to use the system for about 90 days at LAX and 12 other airports in order to gather data and determine if it will expand the system nationwide. It's almost as if this is just some kind of a pilot program. They never planned on doing this. They don't have any plans. They're just like, well, this technology is interesting. Let's try it out. We've been doing some test runs. No, this has been a plan all along, really. And despite the promises of convenience, Mike says, TSA facial recognition is really the tip of a much more insidious government surveillance iceberg. The technology, he says, is part of a much broader federal facial recognition surveillance system. This is a big thing that they've been doing in various federal agencies around just around the whole system since around 2014 or earlier. The airport screening process, he says, could easily be used to feed into and expand that system. Now, we already know back in 2018, the TSA published a specific roadmap about using biometrics. They told us they want facial recognition all over the airport, not just at security checkpoints, but monitoring the entire airport. They were going to match people all the time. This is warrantless mass surveillance, and it has to be really good at it, and they have to partner with other agencies to be able to do all the data, etc. So I don't think it's going to be as limited and just convenient as what they tell us. Now, I did an episode on this. I haven't checked it out in quite a while, and I don't really listen to my own episodes too often, only when I really want to reference back to something. But I did an episode on this back in December of 2018, covering this roadmap for airport surveillance, and specifically how they told us that they wanted facial recognition in every airport, mapping every single person everywhere going in and out, even in buses and trains and things like that as well. So I will link to that in the show notes as well. Back to Mike Meharry. He says it's only a matter of time, and I think he's really onto something, before this seemingly harmless TSA facial recognition system is integrated into the broader federal surveillance network, if it hasn't been already. Now, it's possible that they've already done more than what they're telling us. We know, for example, with surveillance programs, that's generally how it goes. I mean, they were doing the NSA surveillance before someone leaked it, right? We know that they were doing, through the DEA and partnership with local and state law enforcement, they were tracking millions of people just by pictures of their license plates with an automated license plate reader system installed around the country for 8 years before anyone ever found out about it. So it's generally, we find out what they're really doing behind the scenes after the fact. And of course, they're telling us this is for safety, this is for security, this is for convenience, all that stuff. It just makes me think of that famous Benjamin Franklin quote that I know we've all seen or heard many times, some version of it. Those who would give up essential liberty to purchase a little temporary safety deserve neither liberty nor safety. And really, even worse than the idea that this is really going to be providing security, we can also take the position that it's just security theater. And I've got an article here by Sam Jacobs that we published in 2020, and he talks about how the TSA, really, most of what they're doing is it's just a play. They're just trying to make people think they're safe, but the things that they're doing really aren't providing actual security. It might make us less safe, he points out, by providing a false sense of security, as American politicians shy away from ever questioning the efficacy of the TSA or other elements deemed necessary for so-called homeland security. But he says perhaps more disturbing is the established records of TSA agents stealing from passengers. You're far more likely to get robbed by a TSA agent than you are to get protected by one, a shorthand for the bureaucratic state, if there ever was one. And he goes through this whole timeline of TSA boondoggles and security theater, how they implement one thing and then take it away. Of course, we know right off the bat, September 12th, 2001, in the months from there and the months after 9/11, National Guard troops were posted. Their guns were mostly empty. And I think in almost every situation, I remember going to LAX shortly after that and seeing, like guard dogs and German shepherds sniffing at people. But that's just security theater. It's made to make people think that they're being safe. In 2005, he notes that they added lighters to their list of prohibited items. But in 2007, they repealed the lighter ban, and the agency's chief, Kip Hawley, says that taking lighters away is just security theater. They even admit it. So he's got this really interesting list of this whole process all the way through about 2020. I will link to that in the show notes as well. And now next up, I've got Lawrence Vance. I'm sure many of you guys read him over at Future Freedom Foundation. FFF.org is one of the first sites that I read every morning. He's going to be talking about, in his article, about the TSA spending millions and millions of dollars. I think it's like $19 million to be more inclusive with their screening procedures. Not that we want them to be more inclusive. I think, well, I'll get to that in a moment. But first, I should mention that if you want to read some of these articles that I'm mentioning, that previous episode from 2018 where I was talking about the security planning, the biometrics schedule for the TSA 4 years earlier, now they're really implementing it and ramping it up. If you want to find all that stuff, I will link to it in the show notes, where you can find a blog post published for this episode and every episode about 1 to 2 hours after the live stream is done. 10thamendmentcenter.com/path to liberty. And on every individual episode blog post, you're going to find also all the different platforms we're on. Of course, we live stream on the mainstream ones: YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, Twitch. We also live stream at the decentralized, censorship-resistant Odyssey.com, ODYSEE.com. We upload all over the place: Brighteon, BitChute, BitTube. We upload to Instagram, IGTV, whatever they call it now, Gab, Minds, MeWe, and elsewhere. And then, of course, we have the audio-only podcast edition, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, iHeartRadio, etc. Again, 10thamendmentcenter.com/path to liberty is where you can find all the stuff that I'm mentioning. So we've got TSA facial recognition. It's all security theater, or mostly. And then now from Lawrence Vance, he says, the latest outrage perpetrated by the TSA is the spending of more than $18.6 million of taxpayer money, quote, to update airport screening protocols and technology to be more inclusive of transgender, non-binary, and gender non-conforming passengers. Like, look, I don't want the TSA to make any of these people in these categories, I guess we could, if we're going to be collective about it, I don't want them to make them to feel uncomfortable with who they are or how they present themselves, whatever. I don't want them to make you to feel uncomfortable, me to feel uncomfortable. I don't want them around at all. The TSA, Lawrence points out, hopes the new technology will help reduce the pat-downs and other invasive screen procedures, as if their current procedures aren't invasive. They don't care. That are required when transgender individuals trigger body scanners in a sensitive area. Here's how Uncle Joe said it. To transgender Americans of all ages, I want you to know that you are so brave. You belong. I have your back. So we're just going to be more sensitive about how we violate your rights, and that means I have your back. But with the TSA, they don't just have your back. They've got your front, and they've got everything else, too. Now, of course, the other team complained about this. They charged the president with politicizing the TSA. Steve, some guy in Montana, a senator, said this is outrageous and wokeness over national security. They want to make sure. Now, on the left, it's generally the people who are opposing the facial recognition concerns about mass warrantless surveillance. They want to make sure that the surveillance is used only in the right way. And on the other side, they want to make sure that the pat-downs are only used with a focus on national security. Instead, they should be asking a different question. They're not focusing on the real issue at hand, the underlying problem. And here again from Mike Meharry, an article that we published in 2019, the first question we should always ask. Here's the first question you should ask about any proposal made by any person in the federal government. Is this authorized by the Constitution? That's the number one question. So when we're thinking about the TSA, it's not, are they using facial recognition properly? Are they doing the right type of pat-down and screening procedure? Is the TSA even supposed to exist at all? Not, do I like the policy? Not, do I like the guy proposing the policy? And not even, is the policy a win for liberty? None of it. The first question is always supposed to be, is this authorized by the Constitution? Now, Lawrence Vance, in his article, we republished it over on our website, of course. I will link to that in the show notes, 10thamendmentcenter.com/path to liberty. But he doesn't ask the question, he just answers it. He says the real issue here is the existence of the TSA in the first place. There is no reason why airports and airlines cannot use private screening services just like many other countries do. And in fact, like they did just 20 years ago. I hate to be that old dude who's saying like, oh, back when I was a kid, we were paying 5 cents for gas before the government ruined it. I mean, I remember my grandfather saying that, but that's how it was. And it wasn't that long ago. At some point, it will be that long ago. And back, not to just get sidetracked, but maybe little known for those of you who read Mike Meharry or read any of his books or followed our work for a while, Mike used to work in the airline industry. I think he was in security as well. He says this is an article that he published or a blog back in 2012 where he's responding to a message about ending the TSA. He says, I couldn't agree more. I worked in the airline, not me, but I worked in the airline industry, if I'm being Mike, beginning in 2001 and experienced firsthand the creation and growth of the TSA. When it started, the aim was simply to standardize security and provide a more professional airport security screening force. He says the dirty secret was that most of the new pros, and mind you, he was already working there, so all of a sudden they were going to be more professional. Most of the new pros were simply the old amateurs that his co-workers were all of a sudden just working for the TSA. The same screeners wearing fancy new federal uniforms and earning more federal money. And then he talks about how the TSA started with this and expanded, similar to what Sam Jacobs talked about in that timeline of TSA security theater. So anyways, not to get sidetracked, I thought that was just an interesting aside. So back to that essential question. Is the TSA authorized by the Constitution? And I wrote about it back in 2008, and I guess, if anything, and I'm not going to get into too much detail here, the message here at the 10th Amendment Center has been consistent all along, whether it was 2008 or 2012 or today in 2022. The TSA should not even exist. Now, back in 2008, when I published this blog, this is February of 2008, the TSA had just started a new blog post for public comment to talk about some of the things that they were doing, and they were so slammed with comments that at least their initial post, they turned off comments. I wrote one, and here's what I had to say. So, where in the Constitution is the TSA even authorized? In case anyone's wondering, it's not. The Constitution was written under what's referred to as positive grant. Yes, I used to be one of those dudes who wrote a lot of long comments back in the day. But it was interesting because around that time that was a really good way to generate some traffic back to your website. But this wasn't for that because the TSA wasn't allowing me to put links. Anyways, the Constitution was written under what's referred to as positive grant. I was hoping to reach and teach at least one person. That's why I started the organization in 2006. My goal was, okay, I'm going to write some blogs, talk about some things, point out how they're not authorized to do the stuff that they're doing. And if I can just open the eyes of a single person, I'll be happy. So that was my goal here, writing a comment where maybe 5 people read it. Who knows? This means that the federal government is only allowed to exercise those powers which are specifically given to it in the Constitution. I would have worded that differently today, but very similar. The 10th Amendment makes it clear that everything else is left to the states respectively or to the people. Thus, everything an unconstitutional agency does is in direct violation of the Constitution, and that includes using your money to run this TSA blog. So the notion is really the same. Yes, we can talk about how the facial recognition program could be dangerous, it could be convenient, it could lead into other surveillance programs, but they shouldn't even exist in the first place. So whether it's good or bad isn't really the question. The question is, how do we get rid of them? Same goes for the inclusive or non-inclusive screening process. Surprisingly enough, that comment got through the TSA moderators and it was published. The blog is gone. It doesn't exist, but thank you to archive.org. I've got it linked up here. If you want to see it, I will include that in the show notes as well. Anyways, a quick side note. I mentioned positive grant. That's not a term that we hear very often in these discussions around the Constitution. I've used it for many years. I learned it from the late, great Harry Browne. I didn't know where it came from until some years later, and I learned that it came from the great State House Yard speech by James Wilson, one of the way more influential on the ratification process than the Federalist Papers ever were. And here's how he put it. October 6, 1787, congressional authority is to be collected not from tacit implication, not implied powers, but from the positive grant expressed in the instrument of the Union. So expressly delegated powers, if it's not expressly delegated, they can't do it. So here's how Lawrence Vance put it. He's got my view down pat. That's an intentional pun. All my puns are intended today. The TSA, Lawrence writes, shouldn't have more inclusive scanners. It shouldn't have any scanners at all. The agency should not exist in the first place. And this is the kind of message, whether it's the TSA or the ATF or the DEA or just about most federal agencies, most federal programs, most federal acts, laws, orders, rules, and regulations shouldn't exist in the first place. And that's the kind of message we work really hard to get out to more and more people every single day of the year. Nothing helps us get that work done more than the financial faith and support of our members. It starts out at just $2 a month. If you want to join us today and become a member, that's over at 10thamendmentcenter.com/members. I've got some questions I want to get to. But before doing that, I want to say a quick thank you. I really appreciate the support to just a handful of people who have joined us as members recently. There's Robert in Florida, Sherry in Washington, Doug in Utah. And I know you're not new, Vincent. You've been kind of old school at this point, but I really appreciate your generous support. Vincent in Florida, Fred in New York, Jane in California, and Kyle in Missouri. I really appreciate you guys backing us and helping us reach and teach more people about the Constitution and liberty and how to defend both when government refuses to do what it's supposed to do, which is constantly. Again, you can join them, 10thamendmentcenter.com/path to liberty. And let me just see if I can pull up some questions here. One that I saw actually just before starting the live stream over on Facebook, a guy named Jeremiah, I'm not sure if his real name, but anyways, he says, whether they miss the real issue or not, opposition is opposition. So pointing out that he's glad that there are some groups and some people that are opposed to TSA facial recognition, some people who are opposed to TSA spending millions of dollars to be more inclusive with violating everyone's rights. And I agree, opposition is good, but we tend to take the Thomas Jefferson approach. And I'm not sure if I can actually pull this up. Maybe I can get this up on the screen here. I've got this letter from Thomas Jefferson to James Madison. This was the day after the Kentucky resolutions of 1798 were passed, where he was actually saying, you know, we got to nullify the unconstitutional Alien and Sedition Act. It's a clear violation of the 10th Amendment because they weren't authorized to do this, and also a violation of the First Amendment. And here's how Jefferson put it, if we want to have some good strategy. I enclose you a copy of the draft of the Kentucky Resolves. I think we should distinctly affirm all the important principles they contain so as to hold to that ground in the future, and leave the matter in such a train as that we may not be committed absolutely to push the matter to extremities, and yet may be free to push as far as events will render prudent. Short version, you always have to Jefferson, you always have to say what your ultimate goal is. Don't try to pretend to be something that you're not. You always want to reach and teach people with your ultimate goal, but you have to recognize that you're not always going to get that right away. In fact, most of the time you won't. Years earlier, he had a very similar approach when he wrote to the Reverend Charles Clay, and he said the ground of liberty is to be gained by inches. Again, that's very similar to let's not push the matter to extremities. Let's go as far as how events will render prudent. And so when Jeremiah says, you know, opposition is opposition, of course, but someone has to be out there. And maybe that's just us. Maybe that's just Lawrence. Maybe that's Future of Freedom Foundation. Maybe that's you guys. Someone has to be out there saying it's more than just problems with facial recognition. Yes, if we can stop the facial recognition program, or if we can stop them from blowing through more cash, ripping people off even more, that's a positive thing. But at the end of the day, if that's as far as we go, we've failed to do our duty to the Constitution and liberty. Let me see if there's any other questions or comments over here that I can get back to. Taking a look. Lots of back and forth on YouTube. We are buying our own planes in Missouri. Wow, really? See what else. I'm not sure if I actually have anything that I can really jump to. Haji says, security, safety, and emergency are Trojan horses used by tyrants to usurp power and attack our rights to life, liberty, privacy, and property. I don't actually see any comments coming in on Facebook. I wonder, oh, here's one. Larry Laird said TSA, DHS, IRS, FBI, and a myriad of other alphabet agencies are unconstitutional as well. And I think that's important to point out. And like I said, we're actually saying that message as well. We're talking about this particular one. We always have to talk broader. Constitution, every issue, every time, no exceptions, no excuses. Abolish all federal agencies, as Connor. Well, unfortunately, abolish, just the term, and I think this is very popular, and I agree, basically get rid of virtually all of them. I mean, maybe there's a couple that can stick around, but at the end of the day, the word abolish means Congress is going to have to go in there and vote out what Congress doesn't want to vote out. Really, what we need to do is nullify them. When Government usurps power, James Iredell told us. He was one of the first Supreme Court justices who was nominated by George Washington. When government exercises power not delegated to it in the Constitution, he said the people should resist, not ask Congress to stop doing what they're already doing. So it's essential to start taking that approach. James Madison told us the same in Federalist 46 when he told us how to defeat federal programs without relying on the federal government to somehow magically limit its own power. That is, a refusal to cooperate with officers of the Union. Anyways, I hope you guys found this interesting. I hope it was educational. More important, I hope it made you think. Whether you learned something or not, I hope it at least made you think about this in a deeper, more broader way regarding the Constitution as well. Again, if you support us, you support the work we're doing, please consider joining us as a member, 10thamendmentcenter.com/members for as little as $2 a month. You can also smash the like button. That helps trigger the algorithm of the platforms, tells them to show it to more people. Same with leaving a review on Apple Podcast or any other podcast platform. All that stuff helps out a great deal. I guess Facebook is streaming live. I had some trouble last week, which is why I'm double checking these things. Clay Kent says, awesome as usual. I really appreciate that, Clay. You're always so positive with your feedback. I'm very grateful for it. Anyways, thank you so much for being here. I hope you had a great weekend. I hope your week is off to a good start, and I'll see you next time here on the Path to Liberty.